Hello, this is Kathy Go, and I'm here to talk to you today about ocne. So, what is ocne, you may ask? It's the Oregon Consortium of Nurse Educators. This is a group of nurse educators that join together to share ideas and develop a curriculum that meets the needs of nursing students in this time. So, to step back, welcome to the CGCC nursing program. So as you know and have seen, nursing is changing, nursing education is changing because of changing technology, an aging population, and a changing regulatory environment, just to name a few things. So this changing environment is driving a change in nursing education. And the ocne program developed a curriculum to meet this changing environment. So here's an example. The COVID pandemic is an example of something that has greatly impacted the role of nurses in several ways. Nurses have taken on a bigger role as health educators. Nurses play a role in detecting and identifying the spread of the illness, like in a public health setting or in a facility or as an infection control nurse. Nurses prevent the spread within settings and with vulnerable populations, and that would be employing use of personal protective equipment and isolation precautions, preventing the spread within vulnerable populations in general, particularly the chronically ill. So we've learned a lot about comorbidities just in the light of this pandemic. And then just providing care to patients in acute care settings. So these are all different ways, different roles that nurses can take that have changed as a result of this pandemic. This is why, as a nurse, being prepared to be a registered nurse, you have to have the critical thinking skills to be able to shift and change as the environment changes. So what have you seen? So there's a new focus for nursing education because of all the shifting tides in the healthcare environment and in the needs of the population. So the sort of a little historical background, the American Nurses Association adopted new competencies for registered nurses to meet the changing work and educational environment because it was found that nursing programs weren't really producing nurses that were able to function in this changing environment as well as as one would hope. What we've discovered is, you may recall there was a big movement back in the 90s about quality and safety in medication, and that's when in the medical world, and that's when the report put out by the Institute of Medicine called To Err is Human was published, and it identified that medical errors were the third leading cause of death. So that caused a lot of soul searching in the healthcare industry, and nurses were no exceptions. And what we came to realize is that nurses, because of the changing environment, the sort of quicksand environment of the healthcare industry, nurses have to be able to think on their feet. They have to be able to think like a nurse. They have to see problems coming and take steps to be sure that they are giving the best possible care that is both safe and effective, while also addressing the emotional and psychosocial needs of patients. So that's sort of a little aside. So these new competencies were set forth by the Quality and Safety in Nursing Education Initiative, which was an offshoot of this American Nurses Association project. And those competencies are patient-centered care, evidence-based care, teamwork and collaboration, safety and quality improvement, and informatics. What are we learning? in the nursing education. So the goals of nursing education include developing the knowledge, skills, and attitudes for safe and effective care, developing a therapeutic and collaborative communication skills, developing professional values and identity, developing evidence-based practice, and developing a caring, patient-centered approach to nursing. So these are all goals that are upheld by the OCNE curriculum. So here is a link to snoop around and see what the OCNE curriculum is all about. And when you have received this education, you are then ready to become an RN. So hold on to that thought as you go through the program. So let's begin with objective 1. Broadly, what is the OCNE curriculum that you are embarking on? So OCNE is the Oregon Consortium of Nurse Educators, and it's a partnership of Oregon community colleges which share a competency-based nursing curriculum across the state. And this is just the banner from the OCNE website. I wanted to show you what that looks like. So when you go snooping around, when you want to sleuth into this a little bit, the About tab is really helpful. And also the Home tab has some good information about OCNE. So why OCNE? The purpose is to redesign a nursing curriculum to address a rapidly changing healthcare environment. Programs can expand capacity and enrollment, prepare students for graduate and baccalaureate work, use current theories of learning as a basis for teaching. Most nursing educational programs up to this point really didn't make use of current adult learning theory. Didn't use a lot of the active learning techniques which have been researched and proven in other educational settings. It was more of a drill and kill type of approach. Focusing on deep learning of core concepts and connecting theory to clinical practice are all the goals of what the OCNE curriculum is driving to do. So the curriculum is based on these principles, which include inclusiveness, sharing resources to promote the greatest good for the greatest number of Oregonians, collegiality, which includes communication, mutual respect, and open problem solving, advocacy for the profession and for nursing education, conflict resolution, because there's inevitably conflict in any work setting and also when developing programs, and transformational leadership, being committed to a vision of what nursing education can be. So what is a competency-based curriculum, you may ask? So it's a curriculum that emphasizes the complex outcomes of a learning process. So that this competency-based curriculum is not unique solely to nursing. It's used in other settings like the airline pilots have a competency-based curriculum. Other areas have competency-based curricula. And it focuses on the specific knowledge, skills, and attitudes necessary for, in this case, for being a nurse. So one thing that research has shown is that it actually takes a while for a nurse, even after graduating, to really be proficient. And that there's a definite pattern and ladder that the nurse climbs to move from the novice status to the expert status. So as you can see along the way, you become a beginner, you then become competent, and then proficient, and then finally expert. So identify the OCNE core competencies. So we'll talk about that a little bit, and I will show you the document when we're in class. You can also find it in the Moodle folder. So the OCNE competencies include shared core values, insight through reflection and self-care, intentional learning, leadership in nursing and healthcare, collaboration as a part of the healthcare team, practice with the healthcare team, relationship-centered care, effective communication, sound clinical judgments, and use of best available evidence. So those all should look kind of familiar because they've grown from the QSIN competencies that we were looking at earlier. So some of the research that actually has made the OHSU famous in the nursing world is the research into how nurses think and how they develop clinical judgment. So there's actually, this researcher developed a clinical model that is written in this, is described in this article that you'll find in Moodle. That's Tanner who developed that. And those elements are the basis for the OCNE program. So there's 5 elements of the OCNE model. In general, that means that these are the different modalities that are used to help build clinical judgment and also to build critical thinking skills. Concept-based experience, including which helps a nurse recognize patterns, which is foundational to being able to meet a situation as it's evolving. Case-based experience, which is where authentic clinical problems for thinking like a nurse are developed so that you have an opportunity to learn and recognize some of these concepts in an actual patient care case. And then there are intervention skill-based experiences, which are made up of the know-how and know-why of nursing practice. And those would be things like skills lab or learning procedures in the clinical setting or in simulation. Direct focused client care experience, and that again is clinical practice or projects. Some projects also give you that experience. And those would be clinical projects. And then integrative experiences, which apply all elements of prior learning to the clinical practice. So trying to pull all those threads together. And so the whole idea behind these modalities for teaching nursing are to fill in what's called the theory practice gap. So when I was in nursing school, I remember this very well. You know, you kind of learn these abstract theories and concepts, but there was no connection between what you were learning in class and what you were actually seeing in the clinical setting. So this helps you make those connections. That's what nursing education is all about. So let's look at the clinical judgment model and the nursing process. So these 2 models are frameworks for trying to define and describe how nurses identify a problem and how they address it in the healthcare setting. So the elements of the clinical judgment model, which is what the Tanner article describes and what is foundational to the OCNE curriculum, are noticing, seeing which includes what the perceiver knows about a situation and what they might expect to see, and then trying to figure out what doesn't match. Interpreting is making sense of what's going on by one or more reasoning patterns, and then acting and responding. So you're pulling together your subjective information, things that the patient's telling you. You're looking at the demographic information and the history and physical to gather information about the background information on the patient. You are collecting diagnostic information like lab tests and vital signs and things like that from the patient record. And you're assessing that patient. You're using your hands-on skills to try and determine the status of the patient in the moment. Once you've collected all that information, you then identify a pattern, what you think is going on, and then you respond to that, which could be things like monitoring how the patient responds to interventions and revising as needed. That is, so as you're doing things, you're saying, oh, is this working? Is this patient, you identify this patient has breathing problems, and as you're doing your interventions, you think, oh, their respirations are going up or they're going down, and you're adjusting your approach. That's an example. And then reflecting on the entire situation after the fact to build experience and clinical knowledge, clinical expertise and judgment, and that's called reflection on action. So there are these two forms of reflection that are really key to learning. You know, as they say, their unexamined life is not worth living. Well, the unexamined nursing practice is not as fruitful as that which you reflect on and think about. That's how you improve. And people do that throughout their nursing careers. So this is sort of a blurry picture of the Tanner clinical judgment model. And you'll see how these things interrelate and how it all fits together into a whole so that you can find yourself in a situation and respond to it, and then on an ongoing basis continue to refine your responses. So that is one model that helps describe how nurses think. So this topic, Think Like a Nurse, was made popular by Patricia Benner, who also developed the novice to expert theory of nursing development. So that is a kind of a unique, she was able to identify that there's sort of a unique skill set, thinking like a nurse, which is what you're going to learn how to do. First, their first element is critical thinking, which is a spirit of inquiry, which is purposeful and deliberate. Nursing, thinking like a nurse is a complex thinking process. There's problem solving going on, decision making, and clinical reasoning. Also involved in thinking like a nurse, you're drawing on nursing knowledge, theoretical, practical, ethical, and self-knowledge. Those are all elements of your thinking process. And then the nursing process, that is the know-how and know-why of nursing. So what is the nursing process? This is another theory that was developed, I believe, by Henderson, that just helped, you know, she was looking at what nurses do and trying to identify the elements of a nurse's action in a clinical setting, how that works, and tried to break it down so people could learn it. So this nursing process was described as a systematic problem-solving process that guides all nursing actions. The purpose of even thinking about this is to help the nurse provide goal-directed, client-centered care, and also to provide some building blocks for learning how to do this. So this is what the nursing process looks like, and you'll see it's pretty similar to the clinical judgment model. There's a lot of overlap there. So in the nursing process, the nurse assesses the situation by collecting subjective data, that's stuff that the patient tells you, and objective data, that's your assessment, that's lab work, it's things that you can measure or see, then or hear, collect with your senses. That information plus data from the chart helps lead to a nursing diagnosis, and that's based on data analysis, problem identification, and then those problems are translated into what's called a nursing diagnosis. So this is always an interesting concept to try and wrap your head around. So the science of nursing is based on developing nursing diagnoses, which look at how the patient is responding to a given medical situation. So a medical diagnosis is identifying what the problem is happening within the body that is causing this patient's condition, present condition. But the nursing diagnosis is, how does the patient respond to that? And that's what the nurse tries to address. So after the diagnosis has been identified, then the nurse develops a plan. So you can't figure out a plan without determining some outcomes. You got to know where you're going in order to have a coherent plan. So first you would determine the priorities, airway, breathing, circulation is one framework that can be used for prioritization. And then also developing a plan, a nursing care plan based on those priorities and what the nursing diagnosis is. So you identify the thing you're trying to achieve, which is the outcome, and then you identify the steps to get there, which are the interventions. And then you do them. You do the, interventions, which are the things that you do, the tasks, can be nurse initiated, can be physician initiated, or they can be collaborative, which is very much the case in the hospital setting today. There are many professionals involved in delivering of care. It's not just nurses. And then finally, you look at all this process and you look at how the patient has responded and you evaluate it. Were the outcomes met or not met? And if they weren't met, why not? What's going on there? Reevaluate and readjust your plan. So as you see, it's just another way of getting at the same thing. So this is just trying to meld those two pieces of those models together. So you can see that there's a lot of overlap there, just different ways to describe the same thing. So let's look at the OCNE rubrics and benchmarks. So we will talk more about this in the portfolio topic that I'm going to be covering soon. So what is a rubric? A rubric is an assessment tool which sets out performance expectations and provides feedback. And that includes a competency statement, parts of the competency which show mastery, and descriptions of each level of performance. And you will see when we look at the OCNE competency rubric, all that is contained in there. So what's a benchmark? A benchmark is a performance level for each competency. We, in this program, use a document called a CBO, which is a competency-based outcomes evaluation tool. So these competencies are applied in the clinical setting. So we're talking about the performance, the psychomotor and affective domains of nursing right now. And we evaluate that using this rubric to see how you're doing to attain. There's also cognitive pieces that go into it. Takes the whole brain to make this work. But one of the tools that we use is this thing called a CBO. And then for theory-based projects, academic projects, we use rubrics for assignments and projects so that you can see what it is you need to be able to do to successfully complete the project, and also how you can approach it. So these benchmarks, here's an example of competency 1. This is what it looks like. This is the document. So you can see that there is a dimension, there are different levels, and then, excuse me, and different criteria to meet those levels. So the benchmarks are founded on OCNE competencies, and they're used to track the students' progress as they progress through the program. The competencies are measured at different levels, like, for example, at the beginning level this term. So here's an example of a benchmark. OCNE competency number 1, a competent nurse bases personal and professional actions on a set of core nursing values. So that includes a description of the competency, which is nursing as a humanitarian profession based on a set of core nursing values. And then there are, in the rubric, there are examples of what attaining that competency at the beginning level looks like. For example, obtaining a client's permission to provide care. So here's an example of a person addressing a competency, an OCNE competency. So here we are, competency number 1. And this, then it talks about the competency statement, and then the student is addressing how they met the competency, how in their mind, how they met it, and then how they will continue to meet it. And then they will provide evidence, which you will see, we talk about this in the portfolio section, which is proof of the demonstrated competency. So how do you know when you're meeting these competencies? You will be accumulating information on how you've met the competencies as you move through the program. You will keep an electronic portfolio throughout the duration of the program to show how you meet these benchmarks. And then we will talk more about how to build an electronic portfolio as we go along. So, what are the types of learning activities that get you to those competencies? So there's both theory and then there's clinical modalities. There's also, we use a range of active learning approaches. There's good old lecture like this. There's readings. There are exams and NCLEX questions, and those are assessments to measure your knowledge. There are clinical projects and various types of projects which allow you to pull together the theory and the practice. There are written assignments which help you learn how to articulate and write professionally. There are active learning activities and such as case studies would be one example. There are a whole bunch of them, writing concept maps. There are skills labs, which give you an opportunity to learn and practice the psychomotor or the skills that you're learning. There's portfolio, which is the document that you use to collect your work and identify how you're meeting these competencies. And then there are clinical reflections, which, as you see, are key to improving and learning as you progress through your nursing career. So here are some, I mentioned projects. It's one way to solidify the learning here. So here are some examples. In this term, we'll have, one of the competencies addresses the use of current scholarly evidence to support your practice. So that you will get some practice with that with this evidence-based project. There is a thing called a self-health assessment, which helps you apply some of the concepts you're learning in health promotion, and also develop a framework for remaining healthy and developing a full career. The cultural PowerPoint is an opportunity to learn about different cultures and diversity. Pardon me. The preschool health promotion project is an opportunity to teach and to apply some concepts about growth and development. And then the portfolio, which we'll talk about more. So here is just as a part of our efforts to help you stay organized, there is this due date calendar, which is contained in the syllabus. And this is not, don't take this to the bank, but this is what we're looking at for now, just to give you an idea of what the assignments that are coming your way will be and all the different steps you have to do. So please let me know if you have any questions about this. And as you see there, some of these assignments have fixed due there. So there's two different classes you're taking, Nursing 110 and Nursing 232. Most of the projects are just due on a certain date. However, there is one project which you will actually be doing a teaching by a Zoom meeting as if you were in Head Start teaching about a health promotion project. And those, because of the number of people in the clinical groups, will be staggered across 2 dates. So that's pretty much it. So please let me know if you have any questions, and I will talk to you later. Thanks.